Marcus Hale never believed in omens, but on the night the storm swallowed the city, he felt the first shiver of something watching him from beyond the rain. Beside him, Claire Denton pulled her hood tighter, her footsteps echoing unnaturally against the empty street. Neither of them noticed at first that their reflections in the flooded pavement weren't following their movements. The water showed to strangers grinning back at them, wide-eyed and waiting. The rain began as a steady drizzle, soft and harmless, but by the time the last of the daylight had slipped behind the jagged skyline, it had transformed into a torrential downpour that turned the streets into rivers of black water. I pulled my coat tighter against my body, though it was useless now, soaked through and heavy like a second skin clinging to me. Every step I took echoed with the squelch of waterlogged shoes, and each echo felt too loud, too exposed, as if the night itself were listening. I should have taken the bus, I should have waited for a cab, but I told myself I could handle the walk home. It was only a few blocks, and I had made it before in storms just like this. Yet something about this night was different. The city had a strange hush about it, as though the storm had driven all life away. No cars passed by, no pedestrians hurried under umbrellas. Even the usual noise of dogs barking or music spilling faintly from open windows was gone. All that remained was the endless hammer of the rain and the occasional buzz of a flickering streetlight struggling to stay alive. Shadows stretched long and thin across the pavement, bending and warping with each flash of lightning. I tried not to look directly at them, afraid that if I stared too long I might see something moving within. It started with a sound, faint but distinct, behind me, a second set of footsteps in rhythm with my own. I stopped, and the sound stopped. I started again, and so did it. My heart skipped, but I forced myself to turn and look. The street stretched back into empty darkness, rain bouncing off the glistening road. Nothing, no one, just me and the storm. I shook my head and muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself that I was overtired, my mind filling in gaps the silence left behind. But when I turned back, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure, pale and unmoving, slipping out of view behind a parked car. My breath hitched. I forced my pace faster. The sound followed, not loud, not obvious, but always there, always close. Every window I passed seemed to hold a reflection that didn't match my movement, something lingering, peering, waiting. My nerves burned under my skin, and the rain seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Like the storm itself wanted to drown out any thought, any sense of logic. I began to run, not caring how pathetic I must look to anyone who might have been watching. The street ahead stretched unnaturally long, and for a moment it felt as though no matter how fast I moved, I wasn't getting any closer to the corner. A sudden gust of wind shoved me sideways, and I stumbled, slamming against a lamppost. The light above me buzzed furiously before going dark, plunging me into shadows. In that single breath of darkness, I saw it, a face, not human, not right, too pale, the skin stretched thin, the eyes wide and glistening like pools of ink, and a mouth that hung slightly open as though it had been frozen mid-scream. It stared from the mouth of an alley not 10 feet from me, and then, as the light flickered back on, it was gone. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted the last stretch of street until my apartment building finally came into view. I fumbled with my keys, my soaked hands slipping on the metal as I shoved the door open and slammed it shut behind me. My chest heaved, my lungs burning, my ears filled with the sound of blood rushing. I pressed my back against the door, forcing myself to believe I was safe now, that whatever had followed me through the storm hadn't come inside. The hall was dim, lit only by the weak glow of the stairwell light at the end. I shook my coat off and tried to breathe normally again. That's when I saw them. Footprints, wet, dark, fresh, leading from the entrance into the apartment. My heart froze as my eyes followed the trail across the hallway floor, step after step, deliberate and heavy. They didn't go toward the elevator, and they didn't lead back outside. They stopped at my door. My stomach twisted as I realized the prints didn't just end there, they continued. Slowly, cautiously, I turned my head toward the living room. On the wooden floor, reflecting faintly in the dim light, was a path of wet footprints leading across the room, stopping directly in front of my couch. The cushions were indented, as though something was sitting there in silence, waiting, and though my apartment was quiet, drowned only by the muffled roar of the storm outside, I felt a presence so heavy, so crushing, that it was as if the rain itself had followed me inside. The rain didn't let up once I was inside. If anything, it grew louder, heavier, as though the storm had settled over my building and decided it would not move until it had soaked every inch of the world. I sat frozen near the door, staring at the wet footprints that led into my living room. The cushions still seemed indented, though I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the dim light and my panicked mind. But the prints were real. Each one was sharp, glistening, as though made just seconds before. My own shoes had left a mess near the door, but these were larger, wider, and deeper, as if whatever had walked in carried weight far greater than mine. I didn't dare step closer. I didn't want to see if something invisible truly sat there. Instead, I turned away, convincing myself that if I ignored it, it would disappear. The apartment felt suffocating, every corner holding too much shadow, every flickering bulb revealing only fragments of the room. I pulled out my phone, desperate for distraction, but even the screen felt unnatural. The reflection staring back at me in the black glass wasn't quite mine. The eyes seemed darker, the skin slightly paler, the mouth heavier with some expression I didn't recognize. I blinked, and it was gone. My reflection was normal again. Still, I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my neck. Music might help, I thought. Anything to drown out the storm and the noise inside my head. I opened a playlist, let the first song play, but it was wrong immediately. The melody was familiar, yet underneath it ran a low hum, a voice too faint to understand, but persistent enough to be noticed. Words seemed to form in the static, rising and falling like whispers hidden in the rain. I paused it, switched to another track. The same thing. The whispering returned, almost clearer now, but still distorted. I couldn't understand the language, but I could feel the intention it was speaking to me. I snapped the phone shut and tossed it aside, suddenly sick with dread. My gaze drifted to the window where rain splattered like endless fingers tapping against the glass. The sound wasn't random anymore. It had rhythm patterns, like someone trying to signal me. I swallowed hard and forced myself not to look, but the scratching started. It was faint at first, like a twig dragging against the pane, but it grew sharper, more deliberate, moving slowly down the side of the window frame. It wasn't a branch, it wasn't the storm. It was too steady, too careful. I held my breath, my body rigid with fear. I could feel it outside, something pressing close, testing the barrier of the glass. The urge to look was unbearable, but I knew if I saw it, it would make everything worse. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening as the scratching crept lower, circling, tracing symbols I couldn't see but could feel in the pit of my stomach. My chest tightened with each sound until finally, I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes snapped open. The reflection in the glass nearly made my heart stop. It wasn't me. It wasn't anything human. A pale face pressed against the window from the outside, skin slick with rain, hollow eyes wide and unblinking, lips pulled into a grin so impossibly stretched it looked like the skin should have torn. Its forehead was pressed hard to the pane, as though desperate to be closer. The grin widened as I stared, and water trickled down from its hair, though the storm outside gave it no movement. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the wet floor, my stomach twisting violently. When I blinked, the face was gone. The glass was empty again, showing only the darkness of the night and the distorted reflections of the rain. But when I looked closer, I noticed something etched into the window's teeny scratches, so shallow I hadn't seen them before. They weren't random marks from age or weather. They were deliberate, lines cut carefully into the wood, jagged but intentional, forming a crude pattern that looked almost like letters. I leaned closer, my breath trembling. The scratches weren't in any alphabet I recognized, but they carried meaning. The longer I looked at them, the stronger the sense grew that they were directed at me. It felt like a warning, or maybe an invitation. My stomach churned, and I had to pull away before the lines began to move. The storm raged on, louder, as though laughing at me. I couldn't tell if the thing was outside or inside anymore, but one truth pressed heavy in my mind. It knew where I lived, it knew who I was, and the rain was only helping it find its way closer. When I glanced back at the couch, the cushions were still indented, and for the first time, I swore I saw a faint ripple, like the weight of someone shifting in their seat. I couldn't sleep, no matter how many times I closed my eyes and told myself the storm would pass. Every blink brought back that pale, grinning face pressed against the window. Every rustle in the apartment made me think of the couch, and every flash of lightning carved shadows on the walls that moved when they shouldn't have. My body begged for rest, but my mind refused. Exhaustion only made it worse. The lines between what was real and what was imagined blurred until both felt the same. I lay in bed with the blanket pulled up to my chest, trying to steady my breathing, when the lights went out. The apartment fell into absolute blackness. Only the occasional flash of lightning gave me brief glimpses of the room, and those glimpses made my heart stop. In one flash, the door seemed farther away than it should be, as if the hallway had stretched unnaturally long. In another, I thought I saw a tall shape in the corner, dripping, motionless, its outline barely distinguishable from the shadows. Each burst of light revealed the figure closer than before, though I hadn't heard a single step. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for light, my hands clumsy and shaking. When the screen finally lit up, its glow cut across the room. The beam from the flashlight app swung wildly until it landed on the corner. My breath caught. There it was, a figure, taller than any person, its body cloaked in something wet and black, its presence heavy, suffocating. It didn't move, didn't breathe, it just stood there. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed tight, as though the very air had thickened. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, some warped shadow, but the longer I stared, the more solid it became. The dripping was real. I could hear it, the sound of water hitting the floor in a steady rhythm. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I forced myself to raise the light higher. The glow skimmed over its face, and I wished I hadn't looked. The grin was still there, jagged teeth like broken glass, eyes dark and endless, reflecting back the beam of light like a mirror of black water. I staggered backward until my legs hit the bed frame. My body wouldn't move beyond that point, frozen in place, but my gaze flicked toward the television across the room. The screen was dark, blank, but it held a reflection of me standing in the glow of my phone, only it wasn't right. My reflection wasn't alone. Behind me in the glass was the figure, smiling wider than before, its jagged grin stretching in ways that looked impossible. I spun around instantly, but the corner was empty. The drip of water didn't stop. I could still hear it, steady and wet, even though the figure was gone. My stomach tightened, my chest heavy with dread. I turned back to the TV. The reflection still showed it looming directly behind me now, closer than it had ever been. Its grin so wide, the skin around its mouth looked like it might split open. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out. When I opened them, the screen was blank again. Empty, no reflection but my own. My phone light quivered across the room, catching nothing but walls and furniture. Yet the smell hit me then, strong and foul, the stink of wet earth, rotting leaves, and something far worse. Something that made bile rise in my throat. It was as though the storm itself had bled into my apartment, bringing with it the rot of the outside world. I staggered toward the window, needing air, needing to believe the world outside still existed. But when I looked, the scratches had multiplied. What had been a handful of strange symbols carved into the wood were now dozens, maybe hundreds, covering the entire frame. They twisted and curled like some language I wasn't meant to understand, each one freshly gouged as if something had been writing them while I was distracted. I stumbled back, trembling, nearly tripping over myself. The whispers in the rain grew louder, clearer, though the words still slipped through me like water through fingers. The storm wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside, seeping into everything. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows stretched and recoiled, and my apartment no longer felt like mine. When the next flash of lightning struck, I caught sight of something impossible. For a split second, the scratches on the windows seemed to rearrange, forming something that almost looked like a face. The same pale, hollow eyes, the same endless grin. That it was gone, leaving nothing but symbols carved deeper than before. I dropped the phone. Its light spun across the floor, and in that wild spin, I saw wet footprints forming again. Not old ones, not faded ones. Fresh, right there in front of me, step after step, spreading slowly across the room. And this time, they were moving toward me. The storm didn't ease up when morning came. If anything, it seemed angrier, pounding against the building with a sound like fists on a door. I hadn't slept, my body was heavy and weak, but my mind stayed sharp with dread. The rain felt endless now, a constant curtain between me and the world beyond my window. When I looked outside, the street had changed overnight. Cars sat abandoned, their roofs glistening with water. The sidewalks were empty, not even a stray animal in sight. The whole city looked drowned, muted, and wrong. I told myself daylight would make me feel safe, but the light that filtered through the rain was dim and gray, almost sickly. Everything inside my apartment was still damp. My clothes, the walls, even the air. It felt like the storm had seeped through the building's cracks and soaked itself into every surface. My breath came out in faint clouds as if the temperature had dropped, but the thermostat blinked normally. I moved through my apartment in slow, deliberate steps, my bare feet leaving prints on the warped wooden floor. The wet footprints from the night before hadn't dried. They were still there, as though they had been made seconds ago. Only now, they didn't just lead from the door to the living room. They spiraled around the space, looping in wide, perfect circles like some ritual had been performed while I lay awake. My stomach twisted as I counted them. 1, 2, 3 loops, then 4. The water glistened like fresh rain, but I hadn't heard a single step. I tried the door, but the handle resisted, heavier than it should be. The hallway beyond looked longer somehow, the weak light at the far end dimmer, like I was peering into a tunnel. I closed it again, feeling a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. My apartment was changing. I could feel it. The walls seemed farther apart, the corners deeper, shadows lingering a little too long before dispersing. I caught glimpses of movement where there shouldn't have been any, like the air itself was folding in on me. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection was pale and hollow-eyed. I had dark circles under my eyes, but the shape of my mouth was wrong. It drooped just slightly at the corners, enough to look like a faint, mocking smile. I blinked hard, but the expression stayed. When I leaned closer, the reflection leaned in too, but just a fraction faster than I had moved. A soft rasping sound came from behind me. I turned instantly. The apartment was empty. The mirror showed otherwise. The thing in the reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. Its head tilted at an angle mine hadn't. Its eyes were wider, darker, and its grin was sharper now, stretching up toward its temples. A cold tremor ran through me, and I backed out of the bathroom, keeping my eyes locked on the mirror until I was out of sight. When I glanced back, my reflection was normal again. I tried the window, hoping for air, but the scratches had spread even more. They climbed the glass in thin, jagged lines, covering nearly the entire pane. They were deeper now, like claws had raked them in the night. When I pressed my palm to the glass, the rain beyond didn't feel distant anymore. It felt warm, like breath. The whispers came back, too faint to make sense but unmistakably directed at me. I turned from the window and froze. In the middle of the spiraling footprints was something new, a handprint, small, wet, pressed into the floorboards like a stamp. It wasn't static though, it pulsed faintly, the fingers shifting ever so slightly, as if whatever had made it was still there, pushing through from the other side. I stumbled backward, but the circles of footprints closed in around it, almost protective, almost possessive. The air felt heavy, humid with the smell of wet earth. My chest tightened as I realized the rain outside was no longer just sound, it was inside the walls, dripping from the ceiling, crawling down the wallpaper like veins. Shadows pooled around the corners of the apartment, moving in slow ripples, converging toward the handprint. My mind screamed at me to leave, but every exit felt farther away, every door heavier. I retreated toward my bedroom, but the apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like something alive, reshaping itself to keep me inside. And somewhere beneath the roar of the rain, I thought I could hear it breathing, slow and wet, in perfect time with my own. By the time night fell again, I had stopped pretending there was any safety left. The rain never paused, never slowed, as if the world outside had been erased and replaced with this endless storm. The walls sweated with dampness, the ceiling dripped, and the smell of wet earth clung to every breath I took. Sleep was impossible, and hunger had lost all meaning. I was trapped in a place that looked like my apartment, but I knew now it wasn't the same. The footprints never faded. They spread wider, weaving into patterns that spiraled across the floor in ways that made me dizzy if I stared too long. They weren't random anymore. They formed shapes, strange symbols like the ones scratched into the window. I tried covering them with towels, with rugs, even pouring water to blur their outlines, but they always returned, sharp and fresh, like they'd just been made. And worse, they glowed faintly in the dark, a pale, unnatural sheen that guided my eyes to the center of the room. The handprint was still there, small and trembling, its wet fingers twitching every so often as though it were alive. Objects began to disappear. At first it was small things, a cup, a book, a spoon. Then it was bigger. A chair gone from the kitchen table, a lamp missing from the corner. I searched everywhere, but there was no trace. It was as if they had been swallowed whole by the apartment itself. The furniture that remained shifted slightly when I wasn't looking, like the room was rearranging itself while my back was turned. The walls seemed to inch closer, the corners stretching deeper into black. The storm outside grew louder until it was no longer background noise but a presence, a voice. The whispers I had once dismissed as tricks of the rain were clearer now, threading through the air. They didn't form words I could understand, but they carried emotion, mockery, hunger, invitation. Every whisper felt aimed at me, weaving into my bones until I thought I could hear them from inside my own skull. I avoided the mirrors, but they found me anyway. My phone screen, the dark reflection of the TV, even the sheen of water on the floor, they all showed my face, only it wasn't mine. The grin stretched wider every time I saw it. The eyes darker, the skin paler, as though piece by piece, it was showing me what I was becoming. Sometimes, when I blinked, the reflection stayed a second longer than it should have, watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The night bled into something timeless. Hours lost their meaning. I wandered the apartment, listening to the constant drip of water, watching the shadows crawl across the walls. They no longer clung to corners, they followed me, sliding along the floor and ceiling, rippling like black waves. I felt them brushing my skin, cold and slick, as if the rain itself had begun to seep beneath my flesh. My body trembled constantly now, not from cold, but from the pressure of something inside me. It started small faint impressions under my skin, like air bubbles beneath the surface. But soon I saw them clearly, hands, tiny pale clawed hands pressing outward from the inside of my arms, my chest, my neck. I could feel them squirm, feel their fingers curl against me as though they were trying to claw their way free. Panic consumed me, and I clawed at my own skin until it bled, but nothing stopped them. They pushed harder, stronger, eager. I staggered into the living room, desperate to escape my own body, desperate for some answer. The footprints glowed brighter now, circling the trembling handprint in the center like worshippers around an altar. I collapsed to my knees, and the floor felt warm beneath me, pulsing like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder, not from the storm anymore, but from inside me. They laughed, hissed, demanded. I looked at the window one last time. The scratches had formed into something unmistakable, now a face. My face, grinning wider than any human should, eyes black and endless, teeth sharp and gleaming. It didn't move with me. It moved on its own, leaning closer, pressing its forehead against the glass, mirroring the creature I'd seen on that first night. And in that final moment I understood the thing I had feared, the thing I thought was trying to get in, had never been outside. It had always been part of me, hidden in the storm, waiting for the rain to wake it. My screams tore through the apartment, but they were drowned instantly by the roar of the storm. The last sound I heard before everything went black was my own laughter, wet and distorted, echoing from somewhere far deeper than my throat. The rain didn't stop, it never stopped, and in its endless rhythm, I swear I can still hear myself whispering back,